I'm going to try to share this idea with you. Hope I don't knock over the camera mount. This is a 5 or 6 stage cognitive developmental scale, and it works at the macro, meso, micro, and nano scale. That is, at the evolutionary of a species, at the cultural, academic, at the individual cognitive, and at the neuromusculature and neurology and synapse level. Basically, the idea is that people discover something, or they become aware of something, and I'm going to call this first stage existence, because you become aware that something exists. And then at the second stage, we begin to compare it with other things in terms of its difference. That is, we can call it differentiation. And basically, it's a binary way of thinking. Everything is in terms of yes and no, agree, disagree, right, wrong, right? And then at the third stage, you have these two phenomena, but instead of looking at it in terms of only in terms of its difference, we add another phase or another layer of cognitive processing, and that is, we look at it in terms of their similarities. And this study of the similarities basically is a matter of going what I call CCSS. We begin to correlate. And then from the correlations, we begin to coordinate, which requires some level of dynamics. And then at the point where we have dynamic interaction, we move towards synchronizing the activity, and ultimately it achieves what we call a synergy. That is, things that we used to see as separate and independent are interacting in such a way that we can view them as a whole. And that's what brings us to the next stage, where we realize that between these two, which once we perceived as opposites, now we realize that there's an infinite number of possibilities of combinations in between. And we usually conceive of it at stage 4 as a continuum, or as a spectrum between two what otherwise would have been the apparent polar opposites. You know, whether or not these are true or whether or not they're factual or idealistic is not a matter for discussion right now. But then at some point through the exploration of this continuum, this spectrum, we reach some kind of a realization of an absurdity or a paradox. And that paradox leads us to a evolutionary transition to recognize the 6th level, which is the panoptic. The panoptic perspective gives us access to the two extremes and the infinite number of variety in between. In other words, it's a transition from, right here, we make a transition from quantitative to qualitative. And at stage 4, we see that our relationships are more understood in terms of emergence and holistics. Okay. Increase options. Okay. Because at this point, we have an increase in options of both cognitive tools and combinations, we're in a better position to optimize our experiences. All of this has its analogy or comparison in what we call adaptation and evolution. And if you go down one layer yet, it's development. So at the bottom of this scale, things are quite simple, but they increase in complexity through recursion until we experience the transcendence to the panoptic. Right. So down here in the world of simple cognition, it's very difficult to deal with complex ideas if your cognitive skills are limited to only binaries. So complex ideas ultimately result in, when treated only in the symbol, they result in frustration. And the individual, as an agent, resorts to the reptilian brain and emotive responses. Knee-jerk. Okay, now all of this correlates very nicely with Maslow's hierarchy of needs and with Bloom's taxonomy of learning and with Boolean logic, Boolean and Aristotelian logic. Down at the bottom here, you have simple yes, no, and an OR gates. I'm going to go red here. Yes, no, and OR gates. And up here, as you increase in complexity, then you have conditionals and complex combinations of the lower level logical processes. So, quick summary or review. Stage 1, existence. Stage 2, differentiation or binary thought. Stage 3, similarities, which leads to Stage 4, the continuum or the spectrum. Continuum spectrum leads to emergent processing and whole to the parts thinking, as well as parts to the whole thinking. We call this vertical or hierarchical thought. And the key here is that the learner, or the species, harnesses the power of emergent transitions. Hence, he's learning exponentially and even by orders of magnitude. And this gives access to the whole, the holistic, holy. Here we go. I believe that this very well may be what the New Testament prophets were referring to when they spoke of transcendence and the end time prophecies. There you go.